And you can find out more about us online at www.recruiters.network. I'd like to thank our speakers for today, and I am going to turn it over to Rebecca Warren, who is the president of Arizona Recruiters, and she will intro the group and get us started. Rebecca.
Awesome. Thanks, Jason. All right, so we are super excited to be able to share some fun and interesting content with you today. At least we think it's fun and interesting. So I want to introduce our guest on the call here. So I'm going to ask each guest to share a little bit about themselves. And then for fun, since I do work for Cracker Barrel and we have amazing breakfasts, I'm going to ask each of them to share their favorite breakfast food. It doesn't have to be something that we have at Cracker Barrel, but bonus points if it is. So I'm going to flip it first to Shannon. Shannon, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your favorite breakfast food?
Thanks, Rebecca, and hello, everyone. My name is Shannon Taylor. I'm the Director of Talent Acquisition for Republic Services. Republic, just so if you're not familiar with Republic, we are a waste and recycling organization based here in the U.S. And so really excited to be here. My favorite thing, and it is at Cracker Barrel, by the way, Rebecca, is the French toast. Cracker Barrel French toast. I could eat it every day, all day. Give me I like the actual, the round sausage. It's a beautiful thing.
Love it. Okay, thank you. All right, Andrea, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hello, I'm Andrea Lund. I'm based here in Minnesota. I'm the founder and chief coach for the VIP Lab. I work with leaders to really help them identify their vision and lead their teams to great goals. I most recently was at C.H. Robinson for a 9 to 5, doing organizational effectiveness and design work within the technology space. I've been niched in technology for quite a while now. Breakfast food. I really like that cheesy hash brown business that they have at Cracker Barrel. The first thing that popped in my brain.
It's perfect. Perfect. It's so good. Thank you. All right, and William, over to you.
Hi, everybody. My name is William Ranga. I'm the Director of Talent Acquisition over at Spokio, which is a vertical search engine for people's digital identities. We've been in business for about 13 years. And I would say my favorite breakfast food is an omelet. I'll take an omelet any day, anywhere, kind of hard to go wrong. I know Cracker Barrel does a great job with those too.
What does your omelet have to have?
I'll probably go with the Denver omelet if you had of a particular kind.
Okay, I like it. All right, and as Jason mentioned, I am Rebecca Warren, so run Arizona Recruiters from Tennessee. How did that happen? Well, I was in Arizona previously with P.F. Chang's and now with Cracker Barrel Old Country Store. So I run talent acquisition for both the field and home office and help us attract and select fantastic hires into our restaurants, into our retail shops, and also into our corporate office. So that's me. All right, so let's get started. We're going to talk about improv and how it connects to work life. So before we get going on this slide, let me give you a little bit of a background on what improv is and what improv isn't. So some people think that improv is all about being funny, and while sometimes the things we watch that are improvised are funny, it's not necessarily the intent. Improv is actually about being spontaneous. It's about being imaginative, about taking the unexpected and then doing something unexpected with it. So the key is to be open to crazy ideas and then building on them. And that's exactly what we need if we're going to make our workplaces more creative and agile. So those are some ideas from Paul Sloan, who wrote the book, The Leader's Guide to Lateral Thinking Skills. And those concepts are really a foundation for what we're going to be talking about with improv. So way back when I was working in youth ministry, I was trying to figure out a way to make Bible stories come alive. It was fun to do skits, but they always seemed scripted. So I started with melodramas and got the idea to do a murder mystery concept. Maybe I was playing a game of Clue, I don't know. But it really took off with the youth group. And so one of the leaders suggested that I start working on murder. And I started writing and facilitating them. And then one of the hosts at Shop HQ, a previous employer, offered an improv class for those of us at the corporate office. I signed up thinking that it would help me with my murder mysteries, and I loved it. So I then started taking classes and immediately saw applications, not only for my life, but also for the business world. So really, when you look at it, improv allows you to tell a story through your particular unique lens. So some thoughts about improv concepts. You're working without a script. It's co-creation and building on ideas from others, working in teams, balancing your goals with the goals of others, as well as sharing your unique perspective. So as we think about this, we sometimes think of improv maybe as a juggler or a clown show, and it's really not. It's really not anything that's off the cuff. There's lots of lots of prep and planning. So if you think about it, you still practice for an impromptu speech, you prepare for an interview, we hope, you rehearse for a debate team match, or you plan for a webinar, such as this one. You think about what your introduction is going to be, making your points, what your closing is going to be, and then you practice delivering that information clearly with confidence, and then you decide what you want to ask or what you want to know. You may not know the exact, but you have a framework. Parent, counselor, HR partner, store manager, lawyer. You're not always sure what's going to happen, but you have techniques and skills that you can draw upon no matter what comes your way. So if we look at what you see on your screen right here, you've got that really pretty bullseye here. And thinking about what is happening in today's world, what we can control is that middle section. It's not a very big section, is it? And then as we look at what the yellow ring looks at, that's what we can influence, and the red is what we can't control. So if we look about that, improv is not about slacking off on the things that you can control. It's about letting go of the things that you can't. Kind of sounds like living in a coronavirus world, doesn't it? So what we're going to talk a little bit about is learning and practicing improv techniques, which allow you to better influence the outcome of an activity or a situation, even if you can't control it. So it's not about winging it. It allows you to be more prepared. So who's ever worked with kids or young adults, planned a big event at work or at home, opened up a restaurant or a store, and how many times have things gone off the rails? The best plan when you can't predict or control the outcomes is to have more plans. So we're going to talk about what those more plans are. So what comes to mind when you think about improv? Is it an improv troupe such as Whose Line Is It Anyway? Is it Drew Carey? Is it Jim Carrey? Is it freestyle rap? What about jazz? What about MacGyver? What about a day at work? What about being in a restaurant? What about a day with your kids? A day in the office? Going through a pandemic? Improv is work and improv is life. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Improv is made up of building blocks, different elements, concepts, skills, tools, and exercises to create the art and science of improv. So we're going to focus on 8 concepts that can really help you think differently. We're going to talk specifically about how those pertain to work today, but they also can apply to home life as well. All right, you guys ready? Ready to jump in? Panelists, you guys ready? All right. So, improv principle number 1 is about, oh, I don't know who that is. Oh, that was my next slide. You could keep going. I think I might have sent you an old deck, Jason. Those are some ideas on what improv could be and is as well. So, all right, there we go. Yes, yay. All right. So how often do you guys find yourself saying no? I'd like you to think about that and pay attention. Maybe keep count just for a day. I'm guessing you'll be surprised. I know I was when I first did it. So it's our first inclination is to say no. No worries. Uh-oh, were you worried before? Oh, no problem. Was there a problem? So saying yes is the acceptance of the idea, not the validity of it. Think about that. It's the acceptance of the idea, not the validity. So saying yes legitimizes the idea and establishes respect and recognition. It opens up new possibilities, it turns a negative at least to a neutral and maybe even to a positive. So I know I read a parenting book a long time ago when my kids were young, and it challenged me to think through every decision and question if I really needed to say no. We all hear no so much, so it's great when we can hear yes. So this is the first step to building improv scenes. Yes continues the scene, and no stops it. It's critical also to creating strong relationships, teams, and organizations. Yes gets you there, no stops. So in the workplace, I like to use this phrase when I'm faced with a decision that I could answer possibly yes or no. Check yourself before you wreck yourself. Anybody use that before? What I mean by that is, am I looking at the question or the request while assuming best intent of the person who requested it? Am I leaning towards a no because I have an issue with the person, the idea? Am I trying to keep others out of my sandbox? I really have to work to get myself to a neutral place and then figure out what my response is going to be. So with that, I'm going to flip it to William. William, tell me a story about saying yes.
Yeah, I was just thinking of this the other day. I happen to have one executive that is always asking for for more metrics. I don't know if any of you can relate to that, and that's typically a new metric, or double clicking down into another one that they've asked before. And I've just deliberately made a point to be saying yes and asking for clarification around time expectations, around the nature of why they're asking to better serve what they're doing. But I tell you, at first, it used to be, I don't know, I might be ready to go up and die on that metric kill, because I don't know if I can handle just one more being thrown on my plate. And invariably what it ends up now becoming more of a discussion around, because in saying yes, they certainly feel supported, since we're on the same team from a company standpoint. But it certainly allows me to partner and clarify the trade-offs of how much I'm personally involved in delivering that metric or developing that metric if it didn't exist before, and how much this may cost in other areas as a trade-off, simply from an opportunity cost standpoint. And in saying yes and putting that back to them, that allows them to be part of the solution of how we get to that delivery of the yes. And that's been met with much more applause. Before I used to say, well, let me get back to you about that. Or I used to actually engage in saying, is it something we need now, or can it wait a quarter or next year? Or let's see how we're doing right now with the current group of metrics we have. And that was probably valid from my limited scope and trying to be careful of what I had put on our plate as a team or myself individually. But it wasn't supporting the overall team effort of the company with this executive. So it's been a much better relationship and give and take. In fact, we usually joke about what's going to be the next metric coming down the pipeline for that. So it's turned into something a lot more fun to engage with this executive over, as opposed to something that I need to get stressed about because I really can't, control it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's super helpful, because a lot of times we think, oh, well, if I can't be perfect at whatever it is, I'm not going to do it. But that dialogue and that conversation opens up that partnership, as opposed to just saying nope or can't do it, too busy. So thank you. That's a great example. So let's build on that. William mentioned that. So saying yes is one thing. And then what's our tendency after we say yes? Yes, but blah, blah, blah. And I have done that many times. I actually had someone on my team say, when she brought something to me, she goes, just tell me the buts. And I'm like, oh, that's terrible that your employee would right away know that I'm going to have something to add. And so that was a real turning point for me to think about that. It's like, it's kind of a stale compliment sandwich, right? Blah. So think about this example. So Bill, you're great with organizing displays, but you really could use some work on your people skills. That's gross, right? So if you think about it this way, Bill, I'm really impressed with how you created that display, and I have some ideas on how you can carry that skill over to your interactions with customers. Let's talk more after your break. Okay, that's really cheesy, I know, but it is the way for us to illustrate that giving someone a yes as opposed to a no and giving them ideas to build upon is a much better way to build collaboration, partnerships, and connections. So one thing I want you to think about too is you don't just have to use the yes and. It's becoming a little bit more familiar now. A lot of businesses are starting to think about that as a tool, but think about different words that you could use, such as tell me more. That's one of my favorites. Tell me more. Help me understand. Or I really like that thought process. Or what do I need to know about this idea? So you can build on it without having to say yes and. So years ago, I'll tell you a little story. So years ago, a former leader of mine had a fantastic HR background and had moved into talent acquisition. So she hadn't led TA before. I was new. My background was all in TA. And so I was working hard to impress her with all the things I could do and all the ways I could make her department amazing. And so I made this great list of ideas and thoughts and things that we could do. Fired it off to her thinking, I'm amazing. She's going to think I'm the best employee ever. This is fantastic. And about a week later, she responded with a one line that said, what am I supposed to do with this? And I just went, oh, my life's over. She thinks I'm an idiot. I'm stupid, right? I mean, all of these things kind of bubbled up in my head. So I was dejected for a couple of days. Now, think about this. If she had responded with something like, whoa, that's a great list, or quite a list, or a big list. Thanks for the time that you put into that. To help both of us, can you prioritize your recommendations along with some costs? And then let's talk about it at our next one-on-one. So if she had done something like that, it would have been fantastic because I would have felt like the dialogue continued. Her response to me really made me feel like it was shut down. And I can't recall, but I don't think I actually brought it up again. So I also will say that I learned something from that, which is never make your leader guess what you want them to do with what you send them. So that was a learning lesson on my part. So give them all of the information up front so that they're actually able to take action on that. Learning lessons on both sides. So I want you to think about through this concept, how can you turn the but into an and to build on the yes? All right, so now we're going to scooch on. So that was yes, and we talked about yes and. So let's move on to improv principle number 3. So the next slide, which should be making a statement. All right, so I will say, as a recruiter, I am much better at asking questions than I am at making statements. I'm guessing anyone really in HR is really good at that as well, right? It's our job to find out information, to ask questions. Lots of organizations need questions to function. So if we only ask questions, however, who's responsible for the conversation? If you think about it, the other person, right? Anytime we ask a question, we're flipping the ball to the other person. And they are the ones that continue to feed information back to us. So it's very one-sided. I was doing scene work with my improv coach once, and I didn't realize how many questions I was asking. And so he literally halted the scenes, and he screamed across the whole entire group and said, Rebecca, I'm not kidding. If you ask one more question, I'm going to rip off your arm, and I'm going to beat you about the head and shoulders with it. So that sticks with me to say, okay, how do I make a statement instead of always asking questions? So questions gather information, but just as William talked about with his yes and, statements create dialogue and partnership. So Andrea, as a life coach, I know you spend a lot of time asking questions, making statements, and creating dialogue. So can you tell me about a time when you found creating dialogue to be a you?
Yeah, the one that sits with me the most is actually at my last full-time role at C.H. Robinson. As I mentioned, I was there to help the technology group really take their teams to the next level. So I did a lot of work with all of the employees there, as well as the leaders within the organization. One of the things that I needed to tackle right away was creating and revamping the onboarding process for all of the new hires within the organization and the reboarding process for those that were transitioning to different teams. As someone who has 18 years of HR and TA experience, I could have just walked in there and said, well, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, which probably would have had some benefit. However, I wasn't certain that those solutions were going to work in that environment because it's a different company. It may have worked in the past, but again, different company, different players, different dynamics. So instead, I decided to create a new hire focus group. And I met with 80% of all of the new hires that the organization had made in the previous 18 months. And the first key to making sure that that was going to be a beneficial event was to create psychological safety, to create an environment where people felt safe to make their statements, to speak their truth, and to create dialogue to make our processes better. To William's point, when you're creating that type of dynamic, those individuals then feel like they own a piece of that and there is an emotional connection to it, and they want to champion those efforts. So within those focus groups, I created in each of the stages of onboarding different statements and asked each of the participants how true those statements were for them. For example, one of the issues that we had was surrounding diversity. There was an issue with retention of diverse hiring. So one of the questions was, I feel welcomed in my new role at this company. And by simply making that statement and allowing the space then for people to speak their truth, it started to create a dialogue. In response to those statements and their truths, instead of asking more questions, the biggest key that I took away from my coaching training was mirroring and reflecting and acknowledging and validating. By doing those things, you get deeper into what someone's statement is to get to the cause and the why of their statement. So within that, someone would say, yeah, I feel welcome. Okay, so what I'm hearing is that you are feeling welcome. And then follow up with a question. What specifically has your team, your leader done to make you feel welcome? And then they give their response, you mirror it back, and you ask another follow-up question. So you start to get several layers of truth.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And that goes through all areas, even just with a quick email that we may get, right? First response, maybe to say, why do you need that? What's about that, right? So we can turn our questions into statements like, oh, even saying, that's a great question, right? That's a statement that we can then build off of. So I love what you talked about, that back and forth and creating that dialogue and making people feel heard, listened to, and allow them to speak their interpretation of the answer as opposed to us questioning, like with either an open or a question, still causes less dialogue than making statements. So appreciate that. That was awesome. All right, so let's flip on to improv principle number 4, which is listening and seeking to understand. So let's think about this. How many of you would say that you're a good listener? And now, how many of you think that your spouse, your partner, your parent, your child, your friend, your team member, or your boss would 100% agree? Okay, we all might have some work to do there, right? I'm going to throw this out there, and I don't know that a lot of you would argue with me. I would venture to say that we all think that we're better listeners than we actually are. I know I thought I really was great at it until it was pointed out to me that I'm a great talker and an okay listener. So that's certainly been a growth area for me to continue to pay attention to. I'd fallen into the listen to reply rather than seek to understand trap. And so taking time to listen, really listen and see what's underneath that, just as William and Andrea talked about, what are those layers underneath there, and creating the dialogue and the partnership are really important. Listening in improv is critical. Think about the way that the interaction happens. Any kind of improv scene that you've ever seen, or any kind of dialogue, it goes back and forth. Think about throwing a ball from a person to a person, right? So say that you're only listening to part of it, you throw the ball and the other person's like, what, huh? And the ball hits him in the head. So the conversation stops. It's really important to connect with your scene partner in improv, just as it is important for you to connect with those people around you, whether it is at home, at work, or in some other location. You know, one of the other things that has really resonated with me lately is the difference between, and Andre, I think you might have mentioned this, there's a difference between reflecting, responding, and reacting. So I have a lot of times a knee-jerk reaction. How many of us have gotten some kind of either question or email, and we've got something fired off before we've actually read the email, right? We're all ready to go. A trick that I learned a long time ago is never put anything in the subject line when you're doing that, so you can delete it and you don't accidentally send it somewhere. So we fire things off, and we may not have actually had time to reflect or respond. We tend to react. So taking time to really think through it and seek to understand where that person is coming from makes a big difference. So William, I'm going to send this on over to you. So as a recruiting leader, any examples of how you have used the seek to understand principle?
Yeah, heavens, yes. Probably too many. I think one of the things that I learned at home first, I've carried into the office, has been trying to understand what the person needs from me before I try to get in and typically put on my problem-solving hat. It was one particular discussion I had with one of my staff folks was they actually just need me to listen, that he actually wanted to vent, as opposed to me coming in and fixing something that they were already planning to fix. They had several options mapped out for. So clearly I'd misread the situation as what was really needed of me, and then coming with that topic. So that was kind of, it was humorous. We laugh about it now, but trying to make sure, do you need me just to listen to this and hear you out, or do you actually need me to come in and brainstorm and problem solve with you? Because I have very different responses to both, as you know, going forward. Sometimes I'll even come up in bigger meetings. So I've made it a practice to make sure that I actually have not just what my agenda is for the meeting, so that I remember all the points, but it also frees me up to be able to be present in the discussion. And then I'm not thinking about what's the next thing on the agenda and so forth. It's there, it's written down. And as a result of that, that's allowed me to be a lot more thoughtful in asking clarifying questions of the people that are proposing or have a need for me to be listening to whatever's going on in their sphere or program or project.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's tough to do sometimes. I think a lot of us are programmed to be problem solvers and provide the solution, and sometimes we forget that they may not want that. Or maybe it's down the road when they feel comfortable actually hearing it. Maybe they're not ready to hear it, right? So I think those are all great ways for us to think about that. Andrea, we've talked about that as well, and I know that that's important to you in what you do. So how do you use the idea of listening and seeking to understand in your work life?
Yeah. So I look at it from two sides. So I do this obviously as an executive coach. I have to seek to understand what is said, but more listen for what's not said. So a lot of that, again, ties back to acknowledge and validating. So listening to executives that I'm working with and hearing the frustration and labeling that emotion, and then validating that, of course, they feel this way for whatever the situation is. I think in regards to the majority of the audience that we have here, if I think back to my experience leading TA teams, a lot of this, the seeking to understand, comes in working with hiring leaders. I remember when I was at Code 42, we had a particularly challenging leader in the C-suite who was very frustrated with their assigned recruiting partner, to the point where it ended up bubbling up to me. So we scheduled some time, we sat down, and it was just the typical hiring manager BS, for lack of a better word. You know, there's not enough candidates, these candidates suck, X, Y, and Z. And so
Hiring managers actually said that?
Kidding. Well, you know, they're not all you. So in having the conversation, you know, I said, okay, I clearly can hear you're frustrated. Tell me more about what in particularly is frustrating you and what can we do better? So exactly what William was saying is acknowledging that emotion, that there's some frustration here, but what do you really need? And when it came down to it, it had nothing to do with the volume of candidates and had more to do with what the profile was. And when we vetted out all of those different things, I asked, okay, well, when you had your intake with your talent partner, You just said you needed someone that has this, this, and this. Was that communicated, and is that reflective in your job description? Well, I don't know. I didn't look at the job description. And I'm just like, I just said it was fine. It was fine the last time. So by seeking to understand what really was missing, we were able to revamp that job posting, put it out, attract better candidates, and fill the job. But had that conversation not happened, this was just going to be the constant cycle that was going on. The nice thing about that too is that I was able to go back to that talent partner and have that conversation and have that individual then embrace those concepts and those behaviors so that I didn't have to get involved the next time.
There you go. There you go. All right, Shannon, I'm coming to you. So talk to me about a time that you were able to use this principle in your work life.
You know, it's interesting. I was listening to William and Andrea as they talk about sort of that active listening and not going into the whole piece of just answering. And I think for those that are, you know, recruiters on the line, I think it's something that we, in this environment, you know, with all of the technology that we have today, that it happens a lot within interviews, right? Is how many of us have been interviewing a candidate, but we've got an email that comes through and we're trying to write down notes and you forgot the person's last name, right? Or you forgot the candidate that you were talking to because you've had 5 pre-screens with this same role and you're trying to like, okay, is this John or is this Lisa or is this Will? Like, you know, and so what happens is, and I would say within using this active listening within the world of work, is being able to have a clear plan and have a clear plan of communication so you can focus on actually what you're doing. Taking those actions around, you know, turning off the email, shutting off the screen if you're a writer when you write notes, or if you're having if you're a typer of notes, making sure you put on your do not disturb. It's something that is something that we talk to our recruiters about here at Republic around, you know, being in the moment. You know, I come out of the hospitality industry, right? So prior to Republic, I joined, I ran talent acquisition for Royal Caribbean, the cruise line. And so you're always trying to think through what are those magic moments that you can exceed someone's expectation. And the only way to do that is through listening, and listening for the unsaid, the unspoken, the inflection, so that way you can take those moments to dive in and dig deeper so that people have the permission to tell you what they really want to say. And you can only do that within the active listening space.
Yeah, and building on some of the things that we've talked about, using that to create dialogue, right? Sometimes interviews feel like we're just firing questions at people and we're not actually having conversation. So using the active listening idea, using some of the other pieces that we've already talked about, including some things we're going to talk about, it really creates that dialogue. And when you leave an interview, I don't know about you guys, but to me, it always feels like I've done my job well when someone says, oh, that was great. That wasn't bad at all, right? We just had a great conversation, because that's really what you want interviews to be. And that comes from active listening, from hearing what they're saying, asking clarifying questions, making sure that you're clear on what they're doing. And you can't do that if you're distracted. So.
Absolutely.
Hey, Rebecca, let me add one more thing to what Shannon was sharing just earlier.
Yeah.
One of the things that I realized is so often, I'm sure nobody else is guilty of it here, it's got to be just me, that I'm so guilty of going tactical in having a list of to-dos. You've got your recs, we've got your programs, and that we're all about executing. And I got hammered into me a couple of companies ago, the importance of making sure that we've shared the why of what we're doing.
Yes.
So it's not just the what, the why, so they have contextual awareness. And that needs to be mirrored also in the listening of whether it's an issue of what needs to be done or why it needs to be done. Because if you're active listening, you'll clearly be able to distinguish between the two. And they have very different recipes of responding to those concerns, depending on whether it's a client or a team member or peer, based on whether they are confused or don't agree or not aligned with the why versus what needs to be done next.
Yeah, and that's a great point, because a lot of times, like in Andrea's example, we could go tactical and we could fix the symptoms, but we're not actually looking at the root cause and understanding what the problem is that actually would make much more sense to take care of. So going too deep too quickly causes problems, as opposed to also then trying to stay on the surface. So I think that's a great call out and way to tie it all together. All right, we have such great panelists. I'm so excited you guys are on this call. Okay, so let's talk about the next one. Let's move on to improv principle number 5. Tina Fey says, there are no mistakes, only opportunities. And I live that because I make a lot of mistakes, and so I have a lot of opportunities. That's fantastic, right? So failing doesn't mean you're a failure. I think we struggle with that sometimes. Taking risks doesn't mean, and if they don't go well, it doesn't mean that you are a failure. You may have failed in a particular task, but you are not a failure. So when you're considering a choice or a decision, take the fear out by figuring out the worst thing that can happen and then decide how that will impact you. This Is Us. Anybody watch This Is Us? Anybody watch Randall do that? Like, oh my gosh, what's the worst thing? And he and his wife have this conversation back and forth. I'm like, that's fantastic, because at least if you say it out loud and acknowledge it, okay, so if this goes south, this is potentially what could happen. Okay, can I deal with that? Yes or no? If it all goes well, that's great. If not, accept what you need to accept, document your learnings, and move on. So blaming or living in the past isn't helpful. You certainly want to make sure that you're learning from your mistakes or your opportunities, right? But you don't want to lead to an overly cautious or risk-adverse culture because people are afraid of making mistakes. I'll tell you a story, and this one was a little painful. In my previous organization, I was implementing a new applicant tracking system. Got a buy-in from all the stakeholders, from IS, from the vendor, from our project manager, all the people. Talked to the field about it because it was going to be a big deal for the field. Talked to them about it, and I felt like, yes, we've signed off on all the things we need to sign off on. We've talked to all the right people. And then as we're down the road, and I'm literally going, got this, we're amazing, right? And clearly I need to work on that because it's a theme that I'm seeing. And then my boss said, hey, let's have a little chat. He said, someone from field told me that we should fire you because you didn't do a great job helping the field understand how to use the system. Okay, that sucks, right? Like here I am thinking that I've got this all together. We've gotten all the technology stuff done, but the people piece wasn't done the way that the field wanted it to be, right? I thought I had it figured out, but I hadn't actually confirmed with everyone. And so my boss did not agree and said, okay, what are you gonna do to fix it? I'm like, okay. And so I had to come up with all different things that were going to improve the communication, have people feel more connected to the system, understand the why, as William said, why did we do this? How it makes sense? I felt like we had communicated very clearly, but I hadn't. And so I was able to recover and actually got really good feedback after that. But it was a hard blow. And that's never easy to hear when someone says, you suck. So after I fired off all kinds of emails to myself, right? And said all kinds of things and stomped around and screamed and yelled for a while and blamed everybody and their brother and then said, oh wait, this lands on me. So let me just fix this. It also taught me that over communication is not a thing. So that is something that I have worked to implement into my daily life. So I'm going to shoot this on over to William to talk about what he may want to share, and Andrea or Shannon, after William, you are absolutely able to jump in. Do you want to talk about your failures with me?
This is a very cathartic webinar. Thank you.
All the things, all the things.
You know, I think the biggest thing that I learned, and I'm trying to remember where I heard this, was really, and this is how it worked for me, but because it worked for me, I really doubled down to make sure that it worked within my team members, because we often are trying for a lot of our searches some very unique areas that we haven't either done before or are different in the marketplace. And so to pose ideas or tests for which we also have no data, which is kind of funny because we are a huge big data company in the sense of what we do, but to really propose things as experiments. And we found people much more receptive to what we're proposing from a talent acquisition standpoint, whether it's a candidate or or a would-be vendor or even a hiring manager. Let's just test this out. Let's find out if it'll work. Put a little bit of experiment, a little bit of a small amount of effort and resource behind it, and let's test it out for a week and agree to come back and see what happens. If it works, awesome. For which you can smile and to yourself and say, I knew it all along, right? But if it doesn't, hey, it was just an experiment. No harm, no foul. We got the data. Let's learn from it and let's move on. My team members have been much more willing to do stuff like that when they pose it that way. They found that extremely liberating to talk with their clients in those terms.
Yeah, that's a great call out. Use it as a test or a short-term experiment, or because that way you can recover quickly, right? Hey, 3 months in, that didn't work. Let's move on. Great.
And I think that's really interesting, what you mentioned, William, and I kind of laughed on the inside around, that trial/pilot. You just put trial/pilot in front of your idea and everything is good, and people go, oh, okay, let's try it out. No, it really does work. One of the things that I wanted to share too is it's interesting when you think about failure, and from a leadership perspective, one of the things that I think is really important is that we create the space and provide people with the permission to say that it's okay to fail. A lot of folks, there's organizations, and it really depends on your organization and organizational culture, where failure can be detrimental to your career, so you don't take those risks. And if you're in one of those organizations, you typically will look to your leader to say, is it okay for me to kind of step my foot in the water, and will you protect me if it doesn't go well? And for the leaders on the call, I think it's important that when you think about an environment like now, right, where it's a lot of uncertainty, we don't know how long this is going to go. We don't know what the new normal is going to look like. It's important to create that space to try and figure it out together, and know that you may not have the right answer, and no one on your team may not have the right answer, but you have to try something, and be okay with the result and learn from it. And then the second thing I was going to mention too is for you, Rebecca, is around ATS implementation. I think it's going to be the death of anyone in talent acquisition.
Yes.
A similar story here, right? I think about, I recently went through about 12 months ago, through a big ATS implementation, and the pain and the agony and the who moved my cheese and the recruiter freak out moments, and now you kind of build yourself back to, okay, I've now ripped the Band-Aid off. Now how do I stop the bleeding, right? And when you go through any ATS application, I think any organization, anyone in recruiting has been through it will know it is not easy. But what do you learn from it, right? And through ours, we went through the training piece, and I thought everybody understood it, and everything was going to go wrong. And then we flipped the light switch, and everyone said, oh my gosh, somebody turned the lights out. I don't know what to do. I can't do my job anymore. And we had to take a step back and say, okay, how do we now position this change and this training and these processes so that we can now get back to an efficient organization? And through that, we've made several enhancements. So even through that sort of failure of implementation, there's always a road for recovery by taking those areas of opportunity and building on them. So no, it's good stuff.
And sometimes the recovery showcases your skill sets much more than the initial issue. So
yeah, absolutely.
The recovery is always important. So, and another thing that you mentioned, change management. Jason, I'm assuming you're writing that down for a topic for a whole nother webinar all on its own, because we're all going through that in all of the things that are happening here. Change management is huge. So cool. I appreciate that. Thank you, guys. So let's look at improv principle number 6. And we're going to talk about collaboration. Improv is all about your scene partners. Think about if you've ever watched an improv scene and you've got one person who, again, throws the ball and then there's nothing, right? I mean, it stops the scene. So you need each other to make the scene work. Just as we look at in our work life, we need other people to make it work. So doesn't matter what level you're at in your organization, there's some kind of collaboration, teamwork, connection with other people that's really important. So in the business space, maybe that's servant leadership, that's partnership, that's teamwork, there's all kinds of names that we have for it. But bottom line, it's collaboration, cooperation, and co-creation. And in order to do that, and we've talked about this a little bit previously, is we have to take our ego out of the equation, thinking ever. We have to take ourselves out and put the other person first. It's not easy to do. Think about that. So collaborate with others to support each other for the good of the organization, and then focus on the end goal so that whoever we're working with, when they win, we win, and vice versa. Andrea, why don't you tell me a little bit about how you use collaboration in your role?
So going back to when I was at Code 42, it was such a unique environment because it's a startup. And like many startups, you are literally building the car as it's going 60 miles down the road at the same time. So what was unique about our growing HR department is in conversation and having regular conversation with others that weren't on my team, I started to hear a lot of duplication of work. And inefficiencies in how we were doing things, bottleneck kind of behaviors that were really inhibiting a really great employee experience, whether it was on the recruiting side or the onboarding side. So as an opportunity for all of us to work together and collaborate, we decided to take a project management tool in building a RASI chart and starting to identify what do we each own, what is kind of falling through the cracks, and who is the best person to take those responsibilities on. And it created an environment where we got to collaborate on these opportunities for things that were falling through the cracks and give those that had the best skills the opportunity to take those things on. But without having that dialogue, we wouldn't have been able to do that. And you know, in the work that I do in the D&I space, I frequently say that diversity happens because of inclusion, not vice versa. And in creating an environment that attracts and retains and develops diverse workforces, those that come in aren't just visibly diverse. Diversity can be found in different perspectives, different experiences, different areas of expertise. So when you create an environment where people are open about what they're working on and open to hear about others' experiences, you get the best outcomes.
Yeah, I love what you're saying about collaboration, thinking about that term much more broadly. It's not just about working with someone else, but it's thinking about how do I use different tools, different people's experiences, understandings, backgrounds to really make whatever we're working on richer. Mm-hmm. That's fantastic. Okay. Shannon, what do you want to add about collaboration?
Mute myself. There we go.
There you are.
Here I am. You know, so when you think about collaboration, it's one thing that came to mind, right? Is at Republic, my team is I have different verticals within talent acquisition, whether that's our field operations, our emerging talent group, which is more university relations, young talent, early career talent, our call center operation. And so finding ways in which those particular verticals can cross-pollinate one another is really key to a successful talent acquisition team overall, but also what I consider a successful way to build succession planning, right? And then with my team, we've done a lot of work, specifically more recently, and I don't know if it's the teams meetings that we're having or the virtualness of it all. We found a better way to collaborate across the different verticals to find those synergies, to fill those talent pools, to support the business. And through that, the leaders on my team are seeing that, you don't have to, it can't be this is my space, I need you to stay out of it. However, this is my space, let me invite you in it because you may have a perspective that I didn't consider or a talent pool that I didn't have a view of that can now add value to my group, and I can add value to yours in other ways. And so that's one of the things when I think about collaboration, I would say, is being open to the idea of letting someone else play in your sandbox without saying, why are you making a mess, right?
Yeah, and what you said is exactly right, and Andrea talked about that too. Including people causes better collaboration, better diversity, better thought processes, because you're adding a whole bunch of new things by inviting them in. Love it. Okay, awesome. Let's go to improv principle number 7, play the game. What does that mean? What are we talking about games for? So when you step on the stage or enter a scene in improv, you're saying, yes, I'm in, I'm going to play the game. My attitude is there, my head is there, I'm in. But when you play a game, you typically have rules. There's some kind of framework, there's some kind of structure around the particular game that you're playing. So when we think about that, rules in a game give us a framework, right? Some kind of like bumpers in bowling, maybe. So the bumpers make sure you're headed the right way. And once you know the parameters, you can create within that space. There's a lot of possibilities within the guidelines. So I'd rather have someone on my team that has less skills and experience, but shows up every day, ready to learn, ready and excited, great attitude, and in encouraging others to join as well, rather than somebody who's got a ton of experience but acts like they hate being at work. And I know all of us have worked with people who seem like they hate being there. So that's no fun for any of us. It doesn't for any of those other concepts that we talked about. There's not a lot of collaboration. There's not a lot of saying yes. We don't really want to listen to that person. They clearly don't want to listen to us. So when we play the game, we have to understand the frameworks. We have to understand what the guidelines are. And then we have to bring our great attitude within those guidelines. So if you bring it, other people around you will bring it, right? So a bad fit, a body rather than a team member, someone who's passive aggressive or disengaged, they'll drag your team down and sour your culture. I'm going to do a little Southern thing here. I'm going to do it terribly. I'm just giving you a warning. They're going to sour your culture faster than you can say, well, bless their heart. How'd I do? Terrible. That was terrible. I'm sorry, guys. I was trying to be funny. It didn't work.
That was good.
Anyway.
That was good.
So we want to make sure that when we show up at work, we're in it to win it. We want to make sure that we understand the guidelines, we're playing within the guidelines, but we're sharing the attitude that's going to make us all better as an organization. So Shannon, tell me a little bit about how your attitude has made a difference in a work situation.
Yeah, absolutely. So one, attitude absolutely matters. And I think for anyone that's in talent acquisitions, we're natural connectors, right? And so the way in which, I remember sort of thinking through a movie back, I don't know, I'm probably gonna date myself. If anyone's ever seen the movie Little Giants, right? Where the coach has got these little kids, they're gonna play this big team, and they say was it 80% mental and 20% physical? And so there's attitude, right? It's 80% attitude and 20% ability. And so within the work that I do at Republic, it's important that I'm able to make the connections to our leaders, to my team, because that's the way in which the dialogue happens. And so, as an example, what can happen is if you have team members or you work with individuals and you're not willing to engage in that interaction, you will find yourself left out of the interaction, where you have no influence, whether you agree or disagree. If you come into that interaction with the attitude of this person doesn't have any value or they don't have anything to say and I know better, what will happen is you may have a better idea, but your idea is not going to be heard. You're not going to be included, and you will find yourself frustrated on the outside looking in. And it's all not because of your skill. It's not because you're not valuable. It's because of your attitude. And so it's important to make sure that you come in and you connect, because then you can have a dialogue that finds that gets you to the finish line, and gets you included in things you'd never be included that you think you'd ever be included before.
That's great. That's right. It makes a huge difference, right? The attitude on how you handle the recovery after failures, right? You could go into it very differently, but having a positive attitude and being in it 100%, understanding what the rules are, and then being able to share that out with other people makes a huge difference. So awesome. All right, I'm looking at the time here. Want to make sure that we get a chance to get everything in. So I'm going to switch to the last principle that we have here, which is be here now. And I've heard our folks on the call on the webinar, talk about this in different ways. What does that mean to be present, to really listen, to focus, to understand where somebody is in the moment? It's a really hard thing to do, especially when we're here now at home for a lot of folks. There's things going on all over the place. There's kids and pets and family and repairmen and all kinds of stuff happening, right? It's really hard sometimes to focus. We have partial attention on everything. And all of those things have their place, but we really have to work to focus to be in the moment, especially when we're in a work setting and we're dealing with people. So giving 100% really does matter. And other people notice. How many times have you noticed when someone's like, they're not really listening to me, or they're not paying any attention, right? Or they only heard half of what I said. It does make a difference on what your connection is with that person when that happens. So Andrea, tell me a little bit about how you use be here now or be present in your space.
Well, this is a huge principle for the work that I do with coaching. I have to be in the moment. I have to help my clients be able to express themselves, again, through mirroring and acknowledging and validating, but also to help them put together plans on how they're going to execute and hold them accountable. In the HR side, I can think about a situation that we had not too long ago where an individual was being reorged and put onto a different team. And we're sitting in a room, the executive leader's there, I'm there as the HR, strategic HR business partner. The two managers are sitting across from each other, and the impacted employees sitting next to their current manager, who they had a great relationship with. The new manager, they didn't know. And as they're talking about how they're going to transfer work and when that cutoff was going to be, the employee sitting there silent, and I'm just watching. And because I was present, because I was paying attention, not just to what was being said, but I was in the moment and watching and being observational, I was watching the body language of this employee. And so I asked for a moment for everyone to just stop. And I asked the impacted employee, we're all talking about you like you're not in the room. How do you feel about this? What are your questions? And what do you see as opportunities for this to go as smoothly as possible and for you to feel like you're set up for success? Because that's really what we needed to have come out of that meeting. All of the logistics of it and the tacticality of it wasn't as important as this employee feeling like a person, not a commodity. And by giving that employee that space, he identified 3 things that neither of these managers had on their list that were actually pretty critical, both to his current role as well as the role that he would be taking on.
Yeah, so not just showing up, not just paying full attention, but paying attention to all of the things around it, right? Like, what do we need to be looking at when we're talking about people? I think that's great. Okay, so we've got just a few seconds here, or a few minutes, I should say, but I wanted to give everyone that's on the panel a chance to do some closing thoughts. Those were the 8 concepts that I wanted to talk about. I appreciate the dialogue that we've had. Playing the game and your attitude, and then being in the moment. So any closing thoughts from any of our panelists in the last minute or so? You guys want to take just a minute and give your closing thoughts?
Sure. I think one of the things that I really value in my team members and try to both model it and encourage it is curiosity. To be asking questions. It checks the presumptions or assumptions I've made, but 2, it always keeps me in the position of learning for what I may not be expecting or from a different area. And that's something that helps both with the attitude. It certainly helps a lot with collaboration, as well as what was earlier being talked about by Andrea. and Shannon. And as a result of that, it is amazing what you can stumble upon in those conversations. It's a little bit harder when you do stuff remote, but it still can be there. To have those moments of discovery are sometimes really define some searches or projects or programs or even relationships with people for much, much more for the better.
Love it. That's awesome. Shannon, closing thoughts, words of wisdom?
Yeah, no, I would say, listen, as a recruiter, one thing is you have to be is open to the possibilities of what can be. And if you start with that, and not get stuck in a rut and find yourself doing repetitive thought, you can find that leveraging these improv tools and can be a really interesting way to approach supporting the business businesses that you work with.
Yeah, kind of turning things on its head.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Andrea, closing thoughts.
I think that all of these are so fundamental to the work that we do in recruiting and in HR, for sure. I really enjoyed what Shannon had shared about attitude, though. I think that really should be the first concept, because if you don't have the right mindset and the right attitude walking into every day, it doesn't matter if you have all those other tools nailed down. It's all going to fall apart.
Yeah, that's true. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate you spending time with us. A big round of applause to William and Andrea and Shannon for joining us. Jason, thanks for hosting, and we are out. Have a great day. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.